The art of silent power. Imagine stepping into a room full of chatter and ego, and without saying a word, becoming the most powerful person at the table. Strange, right? But in the world of negotiation, silence can echo louder than speech. Silent power is the calm, commanding presence you hold when you choose your words with intention and let pauses speak for you. It's the skill of communicating .strength and .confidence without always needing to explain yourself. In most negotiations, people rush to speak to defend, explain, argue, or convince. But master negotiators know that real leverage often comes from restraint. A well-timed silence forces the other person to reveal more. It creates discomfort, not for you, but for them. In that discomfort, they often try to fill the gap with concessions, more details, or emotion-driven decisions. It's not about being passive. It's about knowing when to speak and when to let the silence do the work. Like a chess master who doesn't rush their move, you command attention by simply waiting and watching. You're at a flea market. The seller quotes a price. Instead of haggling immediately, you pause and just look at the item. The seller, feeling the silence, quickly drops the price. In a business deal, someone finishes a pitch and waits for your response. You take a breath, lean back slightly, and let the silence hang. They begin offering add-ons more value without you saying a thing. People who use silent power understand the psychology of discomfort. They know that silence makes others anxious, especially in high-stakes conversations. It also signals that you're confident, not desperate. It's used to test the other side's patience, to gain more information, or to reset a conversation when things get too heated. But silence can backfire if it's used manipulatively or without emotional awareness. Some people might interpret it as arrogance or indifference, and if overused, it might cause others to withdraw completely. Like all tools, it must be used with balance. Watch for moments when someone stays quiet, just a few seconds longer than expected, especially after a proposal or counteroffer. Notice if their stillness makes you feel compelled to speak first. That's often a sign of silent power at play. You don't need to rush to fill the silence. Instead, acknowledge it mentally and use the space to think clearly. You can even say, "Let's take a moment to think about that," to reframe the silence on your own terms. Slowing down is not a weakness, it's a strategy. Silent power reminds us that in negotiation, words are not the only currency. Presence, patience, and control of tempo are equally important. Take a moment to reflect on this. You don't always have to be the loudest voice to be heard. Sometimes, the strongest message is the one you don't say. The anchoring effect. Have you ever walked into a store and seen a jacket priced at high 10, 0, only to notice a sign that says it's 50% off? Even though 50 is still a lot, it suddenly feels like a bargain. That's the anchoring effect. At work, a subtle yet powerful trick your brain plays during decisions and negotiations. The anchoring effect happens when the first number, idea, or offer presented becomes a mental anchor, setting the tone for everything that follows. Whether it's a price, a salary expectation, or even a deadline, that initial figure quietly shapes how we evaluate all other options. Even if we know it's arbitrary, our minds still drift toward it. Skilled negotiators know this, and they use it to plant values that favor their position. You see it in real estate, in job interviews, in online marketplaces. Wherever a number shows up first, it holds psychological weight. Imagine you're selling a used laptop. If you start by saying, "I was thinking around 0, the buyer's range of counteroffers will likely hover around that number. But if you had started with 0, their counter might have landed much lower. In job negotiations, if an employer says, "This role usually pays 0 a month," you'll likely calibrate your expectations based on that, even if your ideal was higher. The anchor works like a gravitational pull, not always obvious, but always there. Why do people fall for it? Because our brains look for reference points to make decisions easier. It's a shortcut, a mental benchmark. And that's why people often use anchoring deliberately, to set the frame before anyone else can. The problem? Anchoring can manipulate perceptions. It can make unfair offers look reasonable and distort how value is perceived. That's why it's important to notice when the anchor appears, often early, subtly, and with confidence. Listen for phrases like, "Usually this goes for," or "Most people settle around." So how can you defend against the anchoring effect? First, pause before responding to the initial offer. Ask yourself, is this number based on real data or just a strategic move? You can even reset the anchor by introducing your own. Actually, based on the market, I was thinking something closer to. Don't let someone else's first number become your truth. You can shift the weight by calmly offering a new frame. Anchors are powerful, but not unbreakable. Awareness is your first tool. The more you recognize them, the less power they hold. So the next time you hear a number thrown out first, pause, breathe, and decide whether it deserves to hold the center of your thinking. Mirroring, labeling. You know that feeling when someone just gets you. Like they're not only listening, but truly tuned in, not interrupting, not correcting, just making space for your thoughts to unfold. That's the quiet power behind mirroring and labeling. Two simple yet incredibly effective techniques used by FBI negotiators to disarm tension and build rapid trust. These tools don't rely on force or cleverness. Instead, they use empathy as leverage. Mirroring is the subtle technique of repeating the last few words someone just said, not like a parrot, but like a mirror gently bouncing their thoughts back. If someone says, "I've just been under too much pressure," you calmly respond, "Too much pressure?" It sounds almost too simple to work, but it encourages people to go deeper. It shows you're listening and gives them space to unpack what they're feeling. Labeling, on the other hand, is about naming the emotion beneath someone's words. You might say, "It seems like this has been weighing on you," or "It sounds like you're frustrated." You're not analyzing or diagnosing. You're just showing you understand the undercurrent of their words. Imagine using these in a negotiation. The other person starts getting tense. You softly mirror, "You're concerned about the timeline?" Or label it, "It seems like the deadline is causing some pressure." No pushback, no hard arguments, just acknowledgement. And with that, their walls start to drop. People open up. They offer details they wouldn't have shared otherwise. Motivations, hesitations, even what they're really after. These moments of psychological safety can shift the tone of an entire deal. These methods work because they meet people's most basic emotional need, to feel heard. When you mirror or label sincerely, you say, "I'm here to understand, not just to win." It's disarming. It makes you human, and in a world full of posturing and pressure, that stands out. The key is sincerity. If you sound rehearsed or mechanical, the effect fades. But when done right, mirroring and labeling can turn resistance into cooperation. So, listen closely, feel the tension, and when the moment's right, say just enough to show them you see what's beneath the surface. The power of a long pause. Have you ever said something in a conversation, and then there was just silence, and you felt compelled to keep talking, to explain, to soften, to justify what you just said? That discomfort isn't an accident. It's the hidden force behind what negotiators call the power of a long pause. When used intentionally, silence can do something that words often fail to: make people reveal more than they planned. In negotiation, most people fear silence. They rush to fill gaps in conversation, thinking they'll lose control or seem unprepared. But professionals know that silence isn't a void, it's a tool. When you stop talking after making an offer or asking a question, the other person naturally feels the urge to speak. They might lower their demand, reveal a concern, or offer more than they originally intended. That pause creates psychological tension, and in that tension, truth begins to surface. The trick is to stay relaxed, maintain soft eye contact if you're in person, and simply wait. Let's say you propose a price. We could do this for 75, 0. Then you stop. No justifications, no rapid fire explanation, just stillness. The other person fidgets, nods slowly, maybe looks away. Then they say, well, maybe we could shift some features around to meet that. They've just made a concession, and all you did was pause. Or maybe you're being pressured. Instead of reacting, you wait. The silence unsettles them. Suddenly, they're the one trying to reassure you. The reason this works so well is because silence feels like pressure to most people. They assume something is wrong. They become self-conscious. And often, that self-consciousness makes them give away more than they should. The pause magnifies their internal voice, their need for approval or resolution. But here's the secret. You have to be comfortable with the discomfort. You have to trust that saying nothing can sometimes say everything. To use it effectively, practice letting your last sentence land, then hold. Let your breath stay steady. Resist the urge to explain or soften. Let the silence speak for you. Because sometimes, the most powerful move in a negotiation is the one you don't make out loud. BeSleepSmart, your best friend. Imagine going into a negotiation where you secretly know you don't need the deal. You're not desperate. You have another solid option waiting. Suddenly, you feel calmer, more confident, and less reactive. That quiet confidence comes from knowing your partner, your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. It's not a tactic or a line you say out loud. It's your backup plan. And when you know it, you negotiate from a place of strength, not fear. Most people go into negotiations fixated on the outcome in front of them. They put all their energy into convincing the other side, accepting whatever is offered, or fearing rejection. But when you know your partner, everything changes. Your mindset shifts from, I hope they accept me, to, let's see if this makes sense. If not, I have options. That shift is subtle, but powerful. It takes the emotional weight out of the room and gives you leverage that doesn't need to be spoken. Let's say you're interviewing for a job. You've done the research, prepared your pitch, and you also have a second offer already on the table. That second offer is your partner. Even if the employer you're talking to offers a lower salary or slow timelines, you're not trapped. You can calmly say, I understand, but based on what I have available, I'd need something closer to, and leave the silence hanging. Or imagine you're selling your car. You already have someone willing to buy it next week for higher 4 lakhs. That gives you power in today's negotiation. You're not guessing your worth. You've already tested the market. People underestimate BeSleepSmart because it's quiet. You don't bring it up in every sentence, but it changes how you sit, how you speak, and how you respond to pressure. It makes you less likely to accept unfair deals or make emotional concessions. When you don't have a BATNA, you negotiate from fear of loss. When you do, you negotiate with clarity. To develop your BATNA, ask yourself, before any negotiation, what will I do if this doesn't work out? Then invest time into strengthening that alternative. Maybe it's another job lead, another client, another supplier, or simply a willingness to wait. A strong BATNA isn't just a plan B, it's peace of mind. Because sometimes, your best deal is the one you're willing to walk away from. Framing the deal. Imagine someone tells you that a product is 90% fat-free. Sounds healthy, right? But what if they said instead, this product contains 10% fat? Same facts, very different reaction. That's the power of dot framing. In negotiation, framing is about how you present the same information in a way that shifts perception. And when used well, it can turn resistance into agreement and hesitation into action. Framing doesn't lie, it doesn't distort facts, but it reshapes the lens through which those facts are seen. A job offer with 20 vacation days sounds generous. One with, you'll work 345 days a year, sounds exhausting even though they mean the same thing. Skilled negotiators frame offers to feel like dot gains, not dot losses. That small shift taps into a deep psychological bias. People are more motivated to avoid losses than they are to chase gains. If something feels like a win, we're far more likely to accept it. Let's say you're offering a discount. You could say, I'll knock 5-0 off. That's nice. But what if you said, I'll give you a 5-0 bonus for signing this week? Same amount, but now it feels like an opportunity, not just a concession. Or suppose you're on the buying side. Instead of saying, that's too expensive, you say, if we can reframe this in terms of long-term savings, I think we can both be comfortable. You've turned the price into an investment. That's framing. Why does framing work so well? Because people don't evaluate offers logically, they evaluate them emotionally first. We respond to how something is presented before we even weigh the numbers. Framing helps people focus on what they'll gain, not what they'll give up. It feels less risky. It triggers hope, not fear. And in a negotiation, the emotion often drives the decision. Logic just follows behind, nodding. But framing can be misused. It can hide trade-offs or distract from flaws. If you only use it to manipulate, people eventually feel it, and you lose trust. The best negotiators use framing not to mislead, but to clarify value. They help others see the deal in its best light, without pretending it's something it's not. To use framing well, ask yourself, how will this sound from their point of view? Then reshape the language. Emphasize outcomes, benefits, and potential. Make your offer feel like a step forward, not a compromise. And remember, it's not just what you offer that matters, it's how you frame it. The illusion of choice. Think back to the last time someone gave you a choice that felt empowering, maybe 2 or 3 appealing options laid out clearly. You picked one and felt good about it. But what if all those options, no matter what you chose, were designed to benefit the other person? That's what we call the illusion of choice, a subtle but powerful negotiation strategy where every road leads to the outcome the speaker wants. The illusion of choice isn't about trickery, it's about design. Smart negotiators don't just ask, what do I want? They ask, how can I guide someone to choose it on their own? When people feel they're making a decision freely, they're far less resistant. Their guard goes down. their commitment increases. You're not pushing them, they're choosing, or so it seems. Imagine you're selling a service package. Instead of saying, "Do you want to sign up?" you say, "Would you prefer the 3-month plan with weekly support or the 6-month plan with premium guidance?" Either way, they're enrolling, but now they're focused on which package, not whether to sign up at all. The structure of the offer shifted the spotlight. Or think about a parent telling a child, "Do you want to do your homework now or after dinner?" The homework is happening either way, but the child feels involved in deciding. This technique works because it gives the brain a sense of autonomy. Humans are wired to resist being controlled, but when presented with options, especially 2 or 3, we instinctively weigh and compare them. We feel in control, even if all the paths are pre-selected. The illusion of choice satisfies our desire for freedom while guiding us toward the other person's goal. However, it's not just about options. It's about the right options. They need to feel real, not forced. If the choices seem too similar or manipulative, people sense the game. The best uses of this strategy give space for consideration, while quietly removing the no without making it obvious. You're not removing freedom, you're shaping the landscape. To use this in your own negotiations, first define your core goal, then create 2 or 3 choices that all support it. Make them distinct enough to feel genuine, but aligned in outcome. Introduce them calmly and step back. Let the other person process. When someone feels like they're steering the wheel, even if the road is already paved, they'll buy in more confidently. Because in the end, most people don't want unlimited freedom. They just want to feel they weren't boxed in. And when you offer choice with structure, you get agreement with less resistance. That's not deception, that's design. Playing the Columbo role. Imagine walking into a high-stakes negotiation not with a slick presentation or polished posture, but looking just a little confused. You fumble with your notes, tilt your head thoughtfully, maybe even scratch your chin and say, "There's just one thing I'm not quite clear on." This might sound like weakness, but it's actually one of the oldest and most underrated strategies in the book. It's called playing the Columbo role, and when done right, it disarms people, lowers their guard, and creates openings they never saw coming. The name comes from the 1970s detective show Columbo, where the title character appeared forgetful, clumsy, and a bit lost. But behind that messy trench coat was a razor-sharp mind. He'd lull suspects into underestimating him, then slip in a crucial question, often after pretending to leave, that cracked the case wide open. In negotiation, this same tactic can be used to brilliant effect. You don't come in guns blazing. You come in humble, even a little naive, and people underestimate you because of it. Let's say you're in a business deal, and the other party is posturing hard, talking numbers fast, throwing jargon around, acting like they hold all the cards. Instead of matching that energy, you stay quiet. You squint at the spreadsheet and say, "Sorry, maybe I'm missing something. Can you walk me through that part again?" Now they're not defending, they're explaining. They're opening up. And in that moment of lowering their guard, they often reveal more than they meant to. You're learning while they think they're leading. Why does this strategy work so well? Because most people can't resist feeling smarter than the person across the table. When you act curious, unsure, or even a little clumsy, it strokes their ego. They lean into explaining things, and in doing so, they give you insight. They show their assumptions, and they often overplay their hand. The key is, you're not actually clueless, you're playing it. Behind the confusion is calculation. But there's a balance. If you overdo it, you lose credibility. You can't pretend to be lost on everything. Instead, choose moments. Use this technique when the other person is being overly dominant or rushing the process. Slow them down with questions. Pause when they expect you to push. Ask for explanations that make them clarify their position. And always stay alert behind the act. To use this well, be prepared, but don't lead with your strength. Let the other person believe they have the upper hand. Let them teach, explain, even talk down a bit. Then, once they've shown their cards, step forward gently with your own insight. That shift in power will feel sudden, but it's been building quietly the whole time. Because sometimes, the smartest negotiator in the room is the one who pretends not to be. The power of no. We're often taught to chase agreement, to look for the yes, to get people to say what we want to hear. But sometimes, the real strength in a negotiation comes not from the word yes, but from the quiet, controlled power of no. Saying no isn't about being difficult. It's about protecting your boundaries, clarifying your needs, and showing that you won't accept just anything. In fact, no is often where the real conversation begins. When someone hears yes, they relax. The deal is done. The questions stop. But when they hear no, they lean in. They get curious. They ask, why not? They reconsider their offer, reevaluate their position. A thoughtful no creates space. It shifts the dynamic, and in that moment of disruption, you gain leverage. You're showing that your agreement has value and that it must be earned. Let's say someone offers you a project, but the timeline is too tight. Instead of saying, let me think about it, you simply say, no, I can't do it with that deadline. Suddenly, the other side may adjust. They may say, well, what's workable for you? You've now gone from being reactive to leading the discussion. Or imagine you're buying a car. You say no to the first price. The salesperson doesn't walk away. They lower it. Because your no showed you're serious and that you're not desperate. This approach works because no is rooted in clarity. It draws a line. It tells the other person that you know what you want, what you'll accept, and what doesn't work for you. And that's powerful not just in business, but in life. The fear most people have is that saying no will offend, create conflict, or break the deal. But the truth is, most people respect it. And if they don't, that tells you something important about whether they're worth negotiating with at all. But just as powerful as saying no is how you handle hearing it. When someone says no to you, don't panic, don't fold. Understand that their no is also a boundary. Ask questions, explore it. A no isn't the end of the road. It's the beginning of a deeper dialogue. When you respect their no, you create a space for trust. And when they see that you're not pushing past it, they're often more open to finding a middle ground. To use the power of no effectively, speak it calmly, without aggression. Don't over-explain or apologize. Say it, pause, and let it land. If needed, follow with, here's what would work for me. That shows firmness without shutting down possibilities. Because in negotiation, a strong yes is good, but a respectful no can be even better. It's not a door closing. It's you holding the handle, deciding when and how to open it. Emotional contagion. Have you ever walked into a room and immediately sensed the mood even before anyone spoke? Maybe the air felt tense, or something about the energy made you uneasy. That's not your imagination. That's emotional contagion. The invisible thread that ties people's emotions together in a conversation, in a room, or in a negotiation. The emotions you carry don't stay with you, they spread. And in high-stakes situations, the calmest person often becomes the emotional anchor for everyone else. We are wired to mirror the people around us. If someone speaks with anxiety, we feel a little tense. If they shout, we brace ourselves. But when someone speaks slowly, breathes steadily, and listens without reacting, that calm is contagious. It brings the temperature of the entire interaction down. And in negotiation, that kind of emotional control is more powerful than any argument or number you put on the table. Let's say you're negotiating with someone who's clearly frustrated. Their tone is sharp, their body language closed off. You could match their energy, get defensive, talk faster, raise your voice. But instead, you stay steady. You speak gently. You say, "I understand this is important to you. Let's take a second and make sure we both feel heard." That one move, that emotional pause, can completely shift the dynamic. They begin to breathe slower. They soften, not because you told them to, but because you gave them something solid to sync with. This works because people want stability. In uncertain moments, we unconsciously look for someone to follow. That person isn't always the loudest or the most dominant. More often, it's the one who stays grounded. And the beautiful thing is, you don't have to fake being calm. You just have to manage your own emotional state first. Slow your breathing, soften your voice. Focus on listening more than responding. That internal calm sets the tone externally. But emotional contagion isn't just about staying chill. It's about being intentional with the emotion you project. Want the conversation to feel open? Show curiosity. Want the other side to feel safe? Radiate empathy. These feelings don't need to be loud. In fact, the quieter they are, the more they tend to resonate. And when people feel emotionally secure, they negotiate more honestly, more flexibly, and with less posturing. To practice this, notice how you feel before entering a negotiation. If you're tense, take a few moments to reset. Remind yourself that your tone will ripple outward. Stay aware of your pace, your volume, your silence. If things escalate, don't chase the emotion, lead it. Bring it back to center, because in the end, your calm is more than just a feeling. It's a signal. It tells the room, we don't have to rush, we don't have to fight, we can figure this out. And that message, without saying much at all, can change everything. Decoding hidden agendas. In every negotiation, there's what's said, and then there's what's not meant. People don't always tell you what they really want. Sometimes they can't. Sometimes they won't. And sometimes they don't even fully realize it themselves. That's where real negotiation skill begins, in the quiet art of decoding hidden agendas. It's not about being suspicious. It's about being aware that behind every position, there's a motive, and the better you can sense it, the more effective and fair your outcome will be. People hide their agendas for many reasons. Maybe they fear being rejected. Maybe they think revealing too much will weaken their position. Or maybe they've been told to stick to the script. Ask for this. Don't talk about that. But listen closely, and you'll notice clues. The details they repeat, the parts they rush through, the emotional tone beneath their words. Someone pushing hard on price might actually be worried about timeline. Someone obsessed with features might just want to feel heard. Let's say a client keeps talking about budget-cutting costs, staying lean, negotiating discounts. On the surface, it's about money. But if you pause and ask, what happens if the budget goes over? They might reveal the real fear. They're under pressure from their board, or they've been burned in the past. Now you're not haggling anymore. You're building trust, and that changes everything. You're not fighting over numbers. You're solving a problem they didn't feel safe enough to mention earlier. To decode someone's agenda, practice asking questions that go one layer deeper. What's most important to you in this? Or, If you had to choose, would you rather have more speed or more quality? These kinds of questions shift the conversation from fixed positions to underlying interests. They make space for truth. And often, once people feel that space, they fill it not with tactics, but with honesty. But remember, decoding is not about exposing someone. It's about understanding them. When you guess someone's hidden concern and they say, "Exactly," something shifts. They feel seen. And when people feel seen, they stop posturing. They start collaborating. That's when real deals happen, not because you outmaneuvered them, but because you understood them. To use this skill well, listen more than you speak. Watch body language. Note where emotion spikes or disappears. Be curious without prying, and always respond with care. When you uncover a hidden agenda, don't exploit it, acknowledge it. Make it safe to talk about. Because when the real needs come to the surface, the negotiation becomes less of a game and more of a conversation. Building rapport rapidly. Rapport doesn't always take days or deep history to build. Sometimes it happens in the first few seconds with a glance, a shared tone, or a single phrase that makes someone think, "Okay, maybe this person gets me." In negotiations, especially with skeptics or adversaries, building quick connection is not just helpful, it's essential. It's what moves a conversation from guarded to open, from hostile to human. The mistake many people make is thinking that rapport requires agreement, but it doesn't. You can disagree and still build rapport. What it really requires is a sense of safety. People open up when they feel understood, not when they feel convinced. So when you're facing someone skeptical or cold, don't push facts, don't rush your pitch. Instead, slow down. Match their pace, mirror their language. Show them that you're tuned into them, not just talking through them. Let's say you're in a tense negotiation. The other side crosses their arms, avoids eye contact, keeps their answers short. You could push harder, or you could try a different angle. You might say, "I know we probably come from different perspectives here, but I want to make sure I really understand yours before I share mine." That line doesn't solve the deal, but it softens the mood. It signals that you're not a threat. You're not there to win. You're there to listen. Quick rapport also comes from small, human details. Noticing someone's choice of words, picking up on their energy level, asking a simple, respectful question like, "Out of curiosity, how did you first get involved in this space?" These aren't tricks, they're bridges. They turn a formal exchange into a human conversation. And once people feel that shift, they become more cooperative. Not always friendly, not always warm, but more open to engaging without armor. Why does this matter so much in negotiation? Because people rarely say yes to ideas they don't trust. And trust doesn't just come from logic, it comes from connection. When you build rapport early, you earn a longer runway. You earn patience when you make mistakes, and generosity when the deal gets tricky. You become less of an opponent and more of a collaborator. That doesn't mean you're giving anything away. It just means you're working with someone, not against them. So the next time you sit across from someone who seems closed off, remember, rapport isn't magic. It's presence. It's curiosity. It's being just a little more human than expected. And sometimes, that's all it takes to turn tension into traction. Strategic concessions. Sometimes in negotiation, the smartest move you can make is to give something up, not out of weakness, not because you've lost, but because it opens the door to something greater. This is the essence of strategic concessions, the art of giving a little to gain a lot. It's not about surrender, it's about sacrifice with purpose. Knowing when to lose to win, can quietly shift the entire dynamic of a deal in your favor. A concession, when used carelessly, can feel like defeat, but when used strategically, it becomes a message, a gesture that signals flexibility, empathy, or confidence. You're showing the other side that you're not rigid, that you're here to solve, not just to win, and in return, you often get more than what you gave. The key is knowing what to give, when to give it, and how to frame it. Let's say you're negotiating a service contract. The client wants a lower rate. You might say, "I can reduce the upfront cost by 10% if we agree to a 12-month commitment." You've made a concession, but in doing so, you've secured long-term stability. Or maybe you're in a salary discussion and you sense hesitation. You say, "I'm open to starting with a slightly lower number if we revisit compensation after a 90-day review." You've given up a bit now, but planted a seed for more later. That's not caving, that's calculation. Why do these small sacrifices work so well? Because they create reciprocity. When you offer something, even something small, people often feel a subtle need to respond in kind. It triggers fairness. It humanizes the negotiation, and it builds momentum. You're not forcing movement, you're guiding it with generosity. But not all concessions are smart ones. Giving away something essential too early can backfire. That's why you must plan your concessions in advance, rank them by cost to you and perceived value to them. The best concessions cost you little but feel meaningful to the other side. Strategic concessions also give you a chance to reset the emotional tone of a negotiation. If things feel stuck or tense, a small gesture can show goodwill without weakening your position. It says, "I want this to work," and that often invites the other side to meet you in the middle. The power of this strategy lies in control. You're not reacting, you're choosing. You're not just giving, you're trading. Every concession is a calculated step toward your broader goal. So the next time you feel pressured to hold your ground, ask yourself, is there something small I can give that might lead to something bigger? Because sometimes the path to winning begins with the grace of letting something go. Reciprocity trap. You walk into a store, and before you even look at a product, the salesperson offers you a cup of coffee. It's free, no strings attached. You smile, accept it, and continue browsing. But something's shifted without realizing it. You feel a subtle urge to buy something. That feeling is the reciprocity trap, a deep, often unconscious psychological pull to return a favor, even if no one asked you to. In negotiation, this can be both a powerful tool and a hidden vulnerability. Reciprocity is wired into human nature. When someone gives us something, a gift, a compliment, a concession, we feel pressure to give something back. It's a social norm that promotes fairness and cooperation. But in high-stakes conversations, it can be used to steer us toward decisions we wouldn't have made otherwise. That's when reciprocity stops being goodwill and starts becoming leverage. The trap isn't that giving is bad. It's that we often don't realize how much it shapes our choices. Let's say you're negotiating a deal, and the other side unexpectedly agrees to reduce the price. You didn't ask, they just offered. Suddenly, you feel obligated to meet them halfway on something else, maybe a shorter timeline or a longer contract. Not because it's better for you, but because you feel indebted. Or imagine being offered a free trial, a bonus, a friendly gesture. You weren't ready to commit, but now it feels awkward to say no. That's reciprocity, gently nudging you forward. Why does this matter? Because while reciprocity can build trust, it can also cloud judgment. Skilled negotiators sometimes give strategically just to trigger this feeling, knowing it will make you more likely to concede. And when it's unconscious, it's even more powerful. You're not weighing pros and cons, you're responding emotionally. That's what makes it a trap. You're negotiating against yourself without realizing it. To avoid falling into this dynamic, pause anytime someone offers you something unexpected. Ask yourself, is this actually valuable to me, or is it just meant to activate a response? You can appreciate a gesture without letting it control your next move. And if you do want to reciprocate, make it thoughtful, not automatic. Be intentional with your yes. On the flip side, you can also use reciprocity, not to manipulate, but to unlock movement. A small concession, a kind remark, a thoughtful gesture can shift energy. It opens people up, creates flow, and builds goodwill. Just be mindful. Once that door opens, make sure both sides walk through it with awareness, not obligation. Because in negotiation, giving is powerful, but only when both sides understand the exchange. Detecting bluffing. In negotiation, not everything is what it seems. People bluff not always with malice, but often to protect their position, test your confidence, or gain the upper hand. It might come in the form of exaggerated timelines, made-up alternatives, or claims of limited resources. The challenge isn't just hearing what's said, it's recognizing when what's said doesn't quite fit. Detecting bluffing is less about catching lies, and more about sensing inconsistencies in logic, in tone, and in timing. Bluffing often reveals itself through small cracks in behavior. Someone might over-explain a detail that wasn't questioned, or brush off an important point too quickly. They may repeat themselves, shift their posture, or avoid eye contact at key moments. But not all bluffing shows up in the body. It also hides in the structure of what's being said. A good bluff sounds clean on the surface, but when you press lightly, the logic begins to wobble. That's your cue. Let's say the other party says, "We have 3 other offers on the table, so we need a decision by the end of the day." That sounds urgent, and it may be real. But if you respond with calm curiosity, "That's good to know. Could you share a bit more about the other offers?" and they suddenly get vague or defensive, you may be looking at a bluff. Or if someone insists a certain clause is non-negotiable, ask, "Have you made exceptions to that policy before?" A real term has history. A bluff often has no backup. Why do people bluff? Sometimes it's insecurity. Sometimes it's a habit. Sometimes they're simply testing to see what they can get. And while bluffing isn't always unethical, it becomes a problem when it manipulates or misleads. As a negotiator, your job isn't to call someone out aggressively. It's to explore the story just deep enough that the truth becomes visible, not by accusing, but by inviting detail, asking questions, letting silence work for you. To handle a suspected bluff, stay steady. Don't show panic or suspicion. Ask clarifying questions, not to confront, but to understand. Slow the pace. Restate what they've said in your own words and watch how they react. Often, a bluff unravels under its own weight. All you have to do is give it room to breathe. And most importantly, keep your emotional posture relaxed. Bluffing only works when the other side senses they've rattled you. But if you respond with patience, with questions, with quiet confidence, the bluff usually folds on its own. Because in negotiation, seeing through the words is often more important than hearing them. The sunk cost setup. You've spent hours negotiating a contract, weeks developing a deal, or months nurturing a relationship that no longer serves you. You know it's not working. You know there's a better option out there. But something keeps pulling you back: the time, the money, the effort already spent. That feeling is the sunk cost fallacy at work. And it's one of the most common traps negotiators walk into without even realizing it. The sunk cost setup is when we continue down a path, not because it still makes sense, but because we've already invested in it. The deal might be crumbling, the terms may be skewed, but we think, I've already come this far. And so we stay hoping things will turn around, hoping the investment will eventually pay off. But those past investments, they're gone, and they shouldn't decide what happens next. Imagine you're in a partnership where expectations keep shifting. You've already contributed 6 months of your time and resources. Walking away now feels like failure, but staying may cost you even more. Or think about a pricing negotiation that's dragged on for weeks. You've revised your offer multiple times just to keep the conversation alive, but deep down, you know it's not going to work. Still, you push forward because of everything you've already put in. This mindset clouds judgment. It turns rational people into emotional decision makers. The more we invest, the harder it becomes to let go, even when letting go is the wisest move. And smart negotiators sometimes exploit this. They'll drag out discussions, add complexity, or praise your effort, all to deepen your sense of commitment. The deeper you feel tied in, the more likely you'll stay, even when you shouldn't. So, how do you break free from the sunk cost trap? You pause. You ask yourself one powerful question. If I weren't already invested in this, would I choose it today? That question clears the fog. It resets your frame. Suddenly, you're not negotiating from the past. You're making choices for your future. To protect yourself, check in regularly during any long or complex negotiation. Ask, is this still worth it? Am I here because it serves me, or because I don't want to lose what I've already given? And if the answer leans toward guilt, obligation, or fear, take a step back, because clarity often hides behind the discomfort of letting go. Sometimes, the strongest move you can make isn't pushing forward. It's walking away from something that's already taken too much and refusing to let the past write the next chapter. Deadlines. Scarcity. You've probably heard this line before. We need an answer by the end of the day. Or maybe it was, only 2 spots left. Or, this offer won't last. These aren't just time-sensitive statements, they're strategic tools meant to create pressure. In negotiation, deadlines and scarcity are 2 of the most powerful psychological levers used to rush decisions and shape outcomes. And if you're not aware of them, you may end up making choices you never meant to. Urgency compresses thinking. When we believe time is running out, our focus narrows. We stop asking deeper questions. We lose our long-term perspective. Scarcity works the same way when we think something is limited or rare. Its perceived value skyrockets. Even if it's not essential, the fact that it might be gone soon makes us act fast, often too fast. This is where negotiators gain quiet control, by shortening the clock and reducing your sense of choice. Let's say you're considering a vendor. They say, if you don't sign today, we'll have to give this rate to someone else. Suddenly, you feel a rush. You don't want to lose it. But what if that urgency is manufactured? What if the offer would still be there tomorrow or next week? Or imagine being told, we're reviewing other candidates, so we need your decision by morning. The time pressure isn't about logistics, it's about emotion. It's about making you feel like saying yes is the only safe move. Why does this work so effectively? Because scarcity and urgency tap into primal instincts, the fear of missing out, of being left behind, of making the wrong choice by waiting. They bypass logic and activate emotion. And once emotion is in control, negotiation becomes reaction instead of intention. That's the trap. The trick is recognizing it before it steers you away from what actually matters. So how do you manage it? First, pause. Literally take a breath. Ask yourself, if I had all the time I needed, what decision would I make? That simple reframe returns control to you. Second, test the urgency. You can say, I understand the timeline. If I needed one extra day to be sure, would that be possible? Often, the deadline moves, and when it doesn't, at least you know it's real. Remember, real urgency deserves attention, but fake urgency deserves questions. Don't let someone else's clock set the pace of your thinking. Choose based on clarity, not fear. Because in negotiation, time should be a tool, not a threat. Asking how instead of why. There's a small shift in language that changes the way people respond to you. One simple word, but it can open doors, reduce defensiveness, and keep a negotiation moving forward instead of spiraling into resistance. That word is how, and when you start asking how instead of why, people stop feeling like they're being interrogated and start feeling like they're being included. Why? Questions have their place, but in tense moments, they can feel sharp, even accusatory. Why didn't you finish the project? Why is the price so high? Why are you changing the terms? Even if you mean well, those questions can sound like blame. They put people on the spot. They trigger defensiveness. And when people get defensive, they stop listening and start protecting themselves. That's when progress stalls. Now consider how it feels to hear, how can we get this back on track? Or, how did you arrive at this price point? Suddenly, the tone is softer. It invites explanation, not justification. It shifts the spotlight from the person to the process. How opens a shared path. Why draws a line. This subtle rephrasing can reshape the entire flow of a negotiation without changing your goal, your values, or your position. Let's say a partner pulls out of an agreement unexpectedly. You could say, "Why are you backing out?" And they'll likely brace themselves, maybe even retreat further. Or you could ask, "How did you come to that decision?" That question doesn't erase the issue, but it invites them to share their thought process. You'll likely get more transparency, not less. Or in a salary conversation, instead of asking, "Why do you think that number's fair?" try, "How did you land on that number?" Same intent, very different energy. This shift works because how keeps the conversation anchored in curiosity. It turns pressure into partnership. People feel less judged and more willing to engage. And that's exactly what you want in negotiation. Not compliance, but connection. Not silence, but dialogue. And it all starts with the questions you choose. To use this well, listen to your own language during moments of tension. Catch the why before it slips out. Pause and see if a how could lead you to the same insight with less friction. You're not giving up clarity, you're just changing the path to get there. Because in negotiation, how you ask often matters more than what you ask. And sometimes, one soft shift in phrasing can unlock the exact answer you were hoping for. The decoy effect. Imagine you're choosing between two service packages. One is higher 5.0 and offers standard features. The second is higher 8.0 with all the upgrades. You're torn. The cheaper one fits your budget, but the premium one is more exciting. Then a third option appears, 7.800, but it has fewer features than the premium version. Suddenly, the 8.0 option seems like a clear winner. What happened? That's the decoy effect, a powerful tool in negotiation that makes your preferred offer look better simply by placing it next to something worse. The decoy effect works by comparison. People rarely evaluate offers in isolation. They weigh them against what's beside them. A third, strategically inferior option. The decoy makes the better option stand out, even if nothing about it has changed. It subtly guides people toward a choice without forcing them. And because they feel like they made the decision freely, they rarely question it. Let's say you're offering 3 packages to a client. One is basic, one is premium, and one is awkwardly in the middle, almost the same price as the premium, but with less value. Most people will ignore the decoy and gravitate toward the best value, which is now easier to see. Or in a product negotiation, you might introduce a version with fewer features and a price that's almost as high as your ideal offer. It's not meant to sell. It's meant to shine a spotlight by contrast on the offer you actually want accepted. This strategy works because people want to feel like they're making a smart choice. When the best value seems obvious, the decision feels rational. But without the decoy, the same offer may appear expensive or unclear. The decoy provides context, and context creates comfort. That's what makes it so effective. However, this tactic should be used with care. If your decoy is too obvious or feels manipulative, it can backfire. People don't like to feel tricked. The goal is subtlety. The decoy shouldn't look useless, just slightly less appealing. And remember, this strategy is about highlighting value, not hiding flaws. To use the decoy effect in your negotiations, craft your offers intentionally. Present 3 options. Make one slightly worse than your preferred choice. Not terrible, just unbalanced. Let your real offer speak louder by standing next to something slightly weaker. Because sometimes, the best way to make your strongest idea shine is to quietly dim the lights around it. The consistency principle. Think back to a time when you made a public commitment. Maybe you signed a petition, stated an opinion online, or told a friend what you believed. Now imagine someone challenging that belief. You might feel the urge to defend it, even if you've started to question it. That's the consistency principle. The psychological drive to align our current behavior with what we've said or done in the past. And in negotiation, it's one of the quietest, yet most reliable, sources of influence. People want to be seen as consistent. It makes them feel trustworthy, rational, and stable. In fact, most people would rather stick to a previous statement, even a bad one, than appear to be changing their minds. This isn't about ego alone, it's about identity. When someone says, "I always support local businesses," they're more likely to agree to a higher price from a local vendor because changing course would feel like violating their own self-image. Skilled negotiators use this gently. They listen for the values and statements a person has already shared, then build from there. If someone said earlier in the conversation, "We really value long-term relationships," you might respond with, "That's why I believe this 12-month agreement fits perfectly." You're not arguing, you're aligning. You're giving them a chance to stay consistent with what they already said. Let's say you're negotiating with a team that publicly emphasizes fairness. Rather than pushing a hard discount, you could say, "Given how much your company values fairness, I think this package reflects a balanced return for both sides." It's subtle, but it works, because you're speaking to their own narrative, not introducing something foreign, but reflecting something familiar. This principle can also help you stay consistent with your values. If you commit to a pricing standard, or a timeline, or a principle early on, you can reference it later. "I'm holding to that rate because I want to stay consistent with what I promised earlier." People respect that. It builds credibility. And the more credible you seem, the more likely they are to match your clarity with their own. The consistency principle is quiet, but it's powerful. Use it to build bridges, not traps. Don't box someone into their past words. Invite them to live up to them. And when you do that with kindness, you make it easier for both sides to walk away feeling understood. Because in negotiation, helping someone feel aligned with themselves is often the fastest way to get them aligned with you. The door in the face technique. Imagine someone knocks on your door and asks you to donate $0 to a charity. You blink, politely decline, maybe feel a little uncomfortable. Then they say, "No problem, even 500 would help." Suddenly, 500 sounds reasonable by comparison. That's the door in the face technique, a clever negotiation strategy where you lead with a big ask, expecting it to be rejected, so your actual request feels like a relief in contrast. This technique plays with perception. The initial offer isn't meant to succeed, it's meant to set the scale. By starting high, you make the second offer feel smaller, more manageable, more acceptable. It's not just about anchoring a number, it's about using contrast to shift someone's emotional and mental state from "no way" to "actually, that's not so bad." The first door gets slammed, sure, but the second one swings open more easily. Let's say you're asking a client to commit to a 2-year retainer. They hesitate. You follow up with, "Okay, what if we start with just 6 months and revisit from there?" That second offer feels more flexible, even generous, not because it changed, but because it came after something much bigger. Or in a team setting, you suggest launching in 1 month. People push back. You say, "Fair enough, how about 3 months?" You've now framed a timeline that might have originally felt tight as something cooperative. Why does this work? Because people like to feel like they've won something. Rejecting the big ask gives them a sense of control, even strength. When you follow with the real ask, they feel like you've met them halfway, even though you never planned on the first ask being accepted in the first place. It gives them a psychological win without costing you your goal. But the door in the face only works when the first request is believable. If it's too outrageous, it breaks trust. People feel manipulated. So it has to be big, yes, but still within the realm of possibility. And your tone matters. You must present the first offer sincerely and the second with calm openness. If it feels rehearsed or pushy, the effect fades. To use it well, prepare 2 offers, one large, one reasonable. Lead with the larger one, gently expecting resistance. Then, retreat to your true goal with empathy. "I understand that's a stretch. What if we tried this instead?" It's a graceful step back that feels like a step forward to them. Because in negotiation, sometimes opening a door too wide is exactly what makes the next one easier to walk through. Foot in the door. Imagine someone asks if you'd be willing to answer a quick 2-minute survey. You say yes. A few days later, they call back this time, asking if you'd be open to a 30-minute interview. Oddly enough, you're more likely to agree than if they'd asked for the longer interview up front. Why? That's the foot in the door technique at work, a strategy based on starting small, gaining agreement, and gradually building towards something bigger. The psychology behind this is simple. When we say yes to something small, we begin to see ourselves as cooperative, helpful, or aligned with a certain idea. That shift in self-perception makes it easier to say yes again, especially if the second request feels like a natural extension of the first. It's not manipulation, it's momentum. And in negotiation, it can gently move people from hesitation to agreement, one step at a time. Let's say you're pitching a full-service consulting package. Instead of starting with the whole deal, you offer a 1-hour strategy session at a low cost. They say yes. You over-deliver. Now they trust you. And more importantly, they've already taken the first step. So when you offer the full package next, it no longer feels risky. It feels like the next logical move. Or think about an internal team decision. You get agreement to test a feature with one small group. It works. Now it's much easier to roll it out company-wide because people already feel invested. Why does this work so reliably? Because humans want to appear consistent, not just to others, but to themselves. Once we've said yes to something, our brain wants to stay in alignment with that behavior. The second request feels like an extension of who we already chose to be, and when that happens, resistance fades. But like all powerful techniques, this one needs to be used with care. If your second ask feels like a bait and switch drastically different, or too aggressive, it breaks trust. The steps need to feel connected, gradual, and fair. Each yes should feel like a reasonable step forward, not a trap. To use foot in the door effectively, start with a request that's low risk, low effort, and easy to say yes to. Then, build from there. Let each stage earn trust. Let the other person feel in control. You're not pushing, you're guiding. And the more comfortable they feel taking the first step, the more naturally they'll take the next one. Because sometimes, the most powerful agreements begin with the smallest yes. The contrast principle. You try on a jacket priced at CO12, 0. It feels steep, but then the salesperson shows you a CO20, 0 jacket, and suddenly, CO12, 0 doesn't feel so bad. Nothing changed about the first jacket, except your perception. That's the contrast principle. In action, a subtle but powerful tool in negotiation that shifts how we see an offer, based entirely on what we've seen just before it. Humans rarely evaluate things in isolation. We judge value through comparison. Expensive looks cheap next to luxury. Average looks generous next to poor. The contrast principle works by shaping expectations, not by changing the offer itself, but by changing the frame that surrounds it. In negotiation, mastering contrast means knowing how to structure what comes before, so that what comes next lands exactly how you want it to. Let's say you're negotiating a software deal. You present a premium plan, first full features, priority support, top-tier pricing. It's a stretch. But then you show the standard plan, fewer features, but still strong. Now, instead of focusing on cost, the client is comparing between two versions of value. The standard plan feels like a smart compromise, even if it would have seemed expensive on its own. Or imagine you're discussing deadlines. You start by suggesting delivery in 1 week. They resist. You respond with, "Okay, how about 3 weeks?" Suddenly, 3 weeks feels fair, even though it may have been your ideal timeline from the start. This technique is not about deception. It's about understanding how human psychology filters information. The first offer sets the stage. It anchors expectations. And whatever comes next is evaluated not on its own merit, but in relation to what came before. Smart negotiators don't just know their offer, they know what to put before it, to shape how it's received. But contrast can backfire if it's too exaggerated. If your first offer feels unrealistic or insincere, the other person may pull back entirely. That's why your initial framing still needs to be within the realm of possibility. It should stretch expectations, not shatter them. And your tone matters just as much: calm, open, respectful. You're not manipulating. You're helping the other person see value from a different angle. To use the contrast principle well, ask yourself, what do I want this offer to feel like? Then, choose a comparison point that makes it stand out in the right way. Lead with something slightly more extreme, whether in price, time, or scope, and then offer your actual proposal as the more reasonable, grounded alternative. Because in negotiation, it's not always about changing the deal. Sometimes, it's just about changing what comes before it. Emotional anchors. Sometimes, the most persuasive part of an offer isn't the price, the speed, or the specs, it's how it makes someone feel. We like to think decisions are driven by logic, but more often, they're driven by identity. People want to feel respected, safe, competent, generous, admired. And when an offer taps into those emotions, it doesn't just look good on paper, it feels right. That's the power of emotional anchors in negotiation. An emotional anchor is any part of a proposal that ties your offer to something deeper, a value, a belief, or an identity someone holds. It's not about manipulation, it's about connection. When people hear an offer that resonates with who they believe they are or who they want to be, they're far more likely to say yes, not because the numbers changed, but because the meaning behind the offer did. Let's say you're negotiating with someone who sees themselves as an innovator. If you frame your solution as cutting edge or something that puts them ahead of the curve, you've created an emotional anchor. Now, the deal isn't just a transaction, it's a reflection of their forward-thinking identity. Or imagine a non-profit partner who values community impact. If you say, "This approach aligns perfectly with the values you've built your brand on," you've anchored the offer emotionally, not just logically. This works because people want consistency between their choices and their self-image. We want to be seen as generous, smart, loyal, ethical, and when a proposal reinforces that, it becomes more than a decision. It becomes an expression of who we are. And once identity enters the frame, resistance often softens. We're not just buying a product, we're protecting a value. We're affirming something about ourselves. To find emotional anchors, you need to listen. Pay attention to the words people use when they describe their goals. Do they talk about excellence, tradition, security, creativity? Those aren't just preferences, they're clues. They point you toward what matters most beneath the surface. And when you align your offer with those themes, it starts to carry more emotional weight. But this technique only works when it's authentic. You can't fake alignment. The anchor has to be real and feel genuine to them. If it sounds forced, it loses power. If it feels true, it becomes irresistible. So when you make your next proposal, don't just ask, "What are they getting?" Ask, "What are they feeling?" Because when a person sees your offer as part of who they are, or who they want to become, the answer is rarely just yes. It's yes with conviction. Managing dominance games. You walk into a room and the other person doesn't shake your hand. They take the seat at the head of the table, talk over your sentences, or speak just a bit louder than necessary. These aren't accidents. They're signals. And in negotiation, these are known as dominance games, subtle or not so subtle tactics designed to control the dynamic, project power, or unsettle your balance. The key is not to fight them, but to manage them. Dominance games are common when egos are high or stakes feel personal. They show up as interruptions, aggressive tone, one-upmanship, or even silence used to assert control. The goal isn't always malice. Sometimes it's insecurity. Sometimes it's habit. But no matter the reason, responding with equal aggression rarely helps. In fact, it often escalates things. The person who can stay calm, clear, and composed in the face of pressure usually ends up leading the conversation. Let's say someone cuts you off repeatedly in a meeting. Instead of matching their volume or defending yourself, you pause, wait for them to finish, then say, I'd like to respond to that point would now be a good moment. It's assertive, but not combative. Or if someone challenges your expertise with subtle sarcasm, you respond with steady facts, not emotion. You let your presence speak louder than their performance. This approach works because dominance games thrive on reaction. The more rattled you become, the more fuel they gain. But when you stay grounded, the game loses energy. You send a different signal, one of internal stability, and people sense that. It resets the emotional temperature of the room. Sometimes, dominance is about positioning who speaks first, who interrupts, who sets the agenda. If you notice this dynamic, don't panic. Instead, reclaim space slowly. Ask clarifying questions. Use pauses. Speak clearly, not quickly. When someone tries to dominate, don't disappear, but don't rush to defend. Hold your ground without raising your voice. Also, don't assume dominance means strength. Often, it hides uncertainty. The louder someone shouts, the more they fear being unheard. And when you recognize that, it becomes easier to manage not from a place of judgment, but from one of quiet confidence. To manage dominance games well, stay focused on your goal, not their behavior. Respond to content, not tone. If needed, name the energy in the room gently. It seems like things are getting tense. Would it help to pause for a moment? That one line can change the course of the entire conversation. Because in negotiation, true power doesn't shout. It listens, reflects, and moves forward, even when the room tries to pull you off center. The feel, felt, found framework. Sometimes in negotiation, the conversation hits a wall. You've made your case, but the other person pushes back, maybe with doubt, resistance, or a flat-out no. You could argue. You could defend your point, or you could do something unexpected, agree with how they feel. That's the heart of the feel, felt, found framework, a classic empathy strategy that gently lowers defenses and creates space for movement. It starts with acknowledgement. I understand how you feel. That one line signals respect. You're not dismissing their concern. You're validating it. You're saying, I hear you. And in negotiation, few things are more powerful than helping someone feel seen. The next step, others have felt the same way, introduces a shared experience. It tells them they're not alone, that what they're experiencing is common and understandable. And finally, what they found opens the door to new insight, a subtle pivot from resistance to possibility. Let's say a client says, "This package feels too expensive." You respond, "I completely understand how you feel. Others have felt the same way when first reviewing it." But what they found was that the long-term savings far outweighed the initial cost. You're not brushing their concern aside. You're guiding them through it without pressure. Or imagine someone hesitant to try a new process. You say, "I get how this might feel unfamiliar. A lot of teams have felt uncertain at first." But what they found was that it actually made their workflow smoother after just a few weeks. The rhythm is gentle, the logic grounded in empathy, and the shift is gradual, not forced. Why does this work so well? Because resistance often isn't about facts, it's about emotion. And emotion doesn't respond to logic until it feels heard. When you acknowledge someone's viewpoint without challenging it, you take away the need for them to defend it. That creates the room you need to offer an alternative perspective, one that can land more softly, more effectively. The feel, felt, found framework isn't a script, it's a structure. You can adjust the language to fit your tone. You don't need to sound robotic or rehearsed. What matters is the sequence. Empathize, normalize, reframe. It's simple, but it unlocks connection, especially in moments where tension starts to rise. Because sometimes moving someone toward yes starts with showing them you understand their no. Delaying tactics. There's a moment in many negotiations when someone leans back, pauses, and says, "Let me think about it." It can feel like a stall, a way to escape, or even a polite no. But in truth, that pause isn't always avoidance. Sometimes, it's a strategy. A delaying tactic, when used intentionally, can give you space to regain control, gather information, or reset the emotional tone of the conversation. And that space can be worth more than any quick answer. We live in a culture that celebrates fast decisions. Immediate responses are often seen as confident, decisive, powerful, but quick decisions also carry risk. They can overlook nuance, ignore emotion, or react more than they reflect. That's why skilled negotiators aren't afraid to delay. They use time not to avoid the deal, but to improve it. "Let me get back to you tomorrow. Can I sit with this and revisit it next week?" These aren't signs of hesitation, they're signs of awareness. Imagine you're offered a deal that looks good on the surface, the pricing is fair, the terms are clean, but something in your gut feels off. Instead of committing right away, you pause and say, "I'd like to review this overnight and circle back in the morning." That gives you time not just to double-check details, but to see how the offer feels after the rush of conversation fades. Or maybe the other side is applying pressure. "We need an answer now." By saying, "I understand, but I don't make major decisions on the spot," you assert boundaries. You show that your pace matters too. Delaying tactics also invite clarity. Sometimes, just stepping away creates distance from emotional heat. What felt urgent in the moment suddenly looks different in the quiet. You might come back with better questions, stronger counteroffers, or a clearer sense of what you really want. Time gives you that. But there's a difference between strategic delay and indefinite avoidance. If you say, "I'll think about it," but never follow up, trust erodes. So if you choose to delay, pair it with commitment. "I'll have an answer by Friday. Let's reconnect at noon tomorrow." That structure shows respect for the other side and keeps momentum alive. To use delaying tactics well, know why you're pausing. Are you buying time to reflect, diffusing pressure, testing the other side's urgency? Once you know your reason, the tactic becomes intentional, not reactive. Because in negotiation, saying, "not yet," isn't the same as saying no. Sometimes, it's just making room for a better yes. The listening illusion. There's a subtle power in making someone feel heard, even if you're guiding the entire conversation. It's called the listening illusion, the ability to create the experience of deep listening while still steering toward your intended outcome. It doesn't mean being fake. It means understanding that in negotiation, how someone feels often matters more than what is said. We often think of listening as passive nodding, staying silent, letting the other person speak. But great negotiators know that listening can be active, even directional. You can lead a conversation while making the other person feel like they're in charge. You do this by reflecting their language, asking follow-up questions, summarizing their points, and giving small acknowledgements like, "I hear that," or "that makes sense." These moments create trust, even if you already know where you want the conversation to go. Let's say someone expresses concerns about pricing. Instead of immediately countering, you say, "So if I'm hearing you right, your biggest worry is budget flexibility." Now they feel understood. Their guard lowers. And when you offer a response, here's a version that gives you flexibility without losing value, they're more likely to listen. Not because the facts changed, but because you acknowledged them first. This technique works because people don't just want to be right, they want to be heard. When someone feels heard, they're more open to considering new ideas. They're more likely to meet you halfway. And in negotiation, where tension can build quickly, the feeling of being listened to softens everything. It opens the door for actual influence. But here's the trick: it has to be genuine. You can't fake listening and expect it to work. The illusion isn't about pretending to care. It's about showing that you're listening in a way the other person feels. If you try to mirror without intention or nod without comprehension, it falls flat. Real listening isn't just silence, it's targeted curiosity. To use the listening illusion well, practice verbal mirroring. Repeat key words they use. Ask clarifying questions, not to challenge, but to understand. Summarize their concerns before offering a solution. These subtle techniques make people feel seen, even if you're the one guiding the outcome. Because in negotiation, the best path to influence doesn't always come from dominating the conversation. It comes from shaping it gently, while making the other person feel like their voice still leads the way. The yes ladder. Sometimes the most powerful yes doesn't come out of nowhere, it's built step by step, like climbing a staircase. That's the idea behind the yes ladder, a classic persuasion technique that guides someone through a series of small agreements, each one making the next a little easier. By the time they reach the big decision, they're already emotionally and mentally aligned with it. It doesn't feel like pressure, it feels like progress. The psychology is simple. Each time someone says yes, even to something minor, it reinforces their identity as someone who agrees with you. That creates consistency. People want to stay aligned with their previous choices, and each agreement builds trust, comfort, and momentum. A single large decision may feel risky, but 5 smaller ones feel safe. And when they all point in the same direction, the final yes becomes almost inevitable. Let's say you're selling a long-term consulting service. Instead of leading with a full-year commitment, you begin with a few easy questions. Would it be helpful if your team saved a few hours a week? They nod. Do you think a streamlined system could reduce frustration? Another yes. What if I showed you something that does both? At this point, the larger conversation feels natural. The big ask no longer lands in isolation, it arrives with context, already half accepted. Or imagine you're negotiating internally on a project. You start by getting small approvals agreement on a timeline, shared language on goals, alignment on a few early tasks. Each yes builds comfort. By the time the bigger proposal arrives, the funding, the rollout, the public announcement, it feels like the next step in a conversation, not a leap into the unknown. This works because people are more likely to continue than to start. Once someone's on the path, leaving it requires effort. The yes ladder creates that path gently, without force. But it has to be authentic. If your early questions feel manipulative or your steps seem disconnected, the ladder collapses. The secret is alignment. Each yes should feel like a natural extension of the one before it. To use the yes ladder effectively, think in layers. Don't go straight for the peak. Start with agreement on shared problems. Then guide the conversation through shared values, possible outcomes, and finally, your proposal. Let each yes serve as a step that supports the next. Because in negotiation, getting to yes doesn't always require a leap. Sometimes, it just takes the patience to build a staircase. Future pacing. Imagine you're in a conversation and someone says, "So once we get started next week, we'll just need a few documents from your side." They haven't asked for a commitment. They haven't even closed the deal. But suddenly, You're picturing what happens after. You've said yes. That's the quiet magic of future pacing. Speaking as if the agreement is already in motion, and using that vision to shape perception and momentum. Future pacing works by bypassing the tension of decision-making and planting the listener mentally in the world where the decision has already been made. You're not arguing for the deal, you're describing life after it. The mind naturally fills in the gaps. It begins to imagine the outcome, the feeling, the benefits, and in doing so, it starts to accept the decision as a foregone conclusion, not a risky leap. Let's say you're discussing a service contract. Instead of saying, "If you choose to move forward," you say, "Once we begin implementation in the second week, we'll map out a 90-day strategy tailored to your team." You're not pushing, you're painting. The person starts thinking, "Okay, second week, what will we need by then?" They've mentally stepped into the yes, even if they haven't voiced it yet. Or imagine a candidate negotiating a job offer. Rather than saying, "If I get the role," they say, "Once I'm on board, I'd like to meet with the regional leads in the first month to understand their workflow." It's subtle, but powerful. It shows commitment, vision, and confidence without directly asking for anything. And often, it leads the listener to begin picturing the speaker in that role. This technique works because the mind is wired to complete stories. When you provide a narrative that starts just after a successful decision, the brain begins to play along. It visualizes the outcome, and that visualization builds emotional investment. It doesn't feel like persuasion. It feels like possibility. To use future pacing effectively, focus on specific, believable scenarios. Talk about timelines, actions, or feelings that occur just beyond the decision point. Keep your tone light, conversational, and confident, never pushy. You're not assuming authority. You're inviting them into a future that already feels familiar. But always stay grounded. Future pacing shouldn't ignore reality or gloss over concerns. It should coexist with logic, data, and respect. You're not bypassing consent. You're helping people feel what saying yes might actually look like. Because in negotiation, sometimes the best way to get someone to agree is to help them live there for just a moment. Authority bias in deals. Picture a negotiation where someone says, "This model was developed by a Harvard researcher," or "We've partnered with a Fortune 500 company." The moment you hear it, something shifts. Even if the offer hasn't changed, your perception has. That's the quiet influence of the authority bias, the tendency to trust, follow, or comply with people who carry titles, credentials, or affiliations that signal expertise or power. And in negotiation, this bias often guides decisions more than facts do. Authority bias is built into how we process information. We're taught from a young age to respect experts, doctors, professors, executives. Their status makes us more likely to assume they know what they're doing. In high-stakes conversations, this instinct can make us second-guess our own judgment, just because the other party has a fancy title or prestigious logo attached to their offer. And that's where the influence begins. Let's say a consultant opens a pitch by saying they've worked with NASA or Google. That detail may have nothing to do with your problem, but suddenly, their proposal feels more trustworthy. Or consider a sales rep who subtly drops, "I've been doing this for 20 years. They haven't added new evidence, just a credential. And yet, their offer starts to carry more weight. The offer hasn't changed. Your brain has. This strategy works because it taps into something emotional, the desire to be safe, to avoid risk, to lean on perceived wisdom. We tell ourselves, if they're connected to that, they must be legitimate. It creates a shortcut in our thinking one that can be helpful, but also misleading, because authority doesn't always equal accuracy, and credentials don't always mean compatibility. To use authority bias ethically in negotiation, be transparent. If your background or affiliations truly strengthen your offer, share them clearly, not to manipulate, but to add context. This framework was originally developed at MIT, and I've adapted it for teams like yours. That's honest, informative, and respectful. It supports your credibility without forcing the other person into agreement. But just as important is knowing how to resist authority bias when you're on the receiving end. Pause when credentials are mentioned. Ask, is this relevant to our specific goals? Don't dismiss expertise, but don't let it override your instincts either. Authority should support a deal, not be the reason for it. Because in negotiation, respect matters, but so does discernment. Titles can open doors, but it's your judgment that decides whether to walk through. The scarcity illusion. You see a message that says, only 3 spots left, or offer ends tonight. Your heart beats just a little faster. Even if you weren't planning to act, something stirs a sense that if you don't move now, you'll miss something important. That's the power of the scarcity illusion, a tool used in negotiation and sales to create urgency, even when that urgency isn't real. The brain is wired to value what appears to be rare. When something feels limited, whether it's time, availability, or access, we assign it more worth. Not because the item itself is better, but because we fear missing out. That's what makes scarcity so effective. It short-circuits rational thinking and replaces it with emotional pressure. We start reacting instead of reasoning. Let's say you're offered a discounted rate, but only if you commit by the end of the call. Or someone tells you, we have other buyers interested, so we'll need a fast decision. These tactics are designed to compress your timeline. You don't get to step back, evaluate, or compare. The illusion is that the opportunity is vanishing, and that saying yes right now is the only safe move. Sometimes, scarcity is real. There are only so many seats, or a deadline that truly matters. But often, the urgency is manufactured. It's not about the offer, it's about to control. The person using scarcity wants to control the pace, the mood, the decision window, and once you feel rushed, you're more likely to agree just to relieve the tension. To manage this, practice noticing when urgency appears. Ask yourself, is the deadline real or designed? You can even ask directly, what happens if I decide tomorrow instead of today? If the offer suddenly becomes flexible, you've just pierced the illusion. And in that moment, the power shifts back to you. On the other side, you can use scarcity, but ethically. If you truly have limited availability or a closing window, communicate that honestly and respectfully. I have 2 slots open this month, and after that, scheduling becomes tight. That's transparent. It helps the other person make a choice without applying artificial pressure. The key is balance. Scarcity can signal value, but it shouldn't replace substance. A great deal should stand on its own, not be propped up by a ticking clock. Because in negotiation, urgency is powerful, but clarity is stronger. Don't let the fear of missing out make you miss what actually matters. Win-win fallacy. Let's find a win-win. It sounds ideal, a resolution where everyone walks away satisfied. And in many negotiations, that's genuinely possible. But sometimes, the promise of a win-win outcome isn't a shared benefit, it's a tactic. One that masks pressure, limits alternatives, and persuades you to accept less under the illusion of mutual success. That's the danger of the win-win fallacy. The term win-win is often used to frame an offer as fair or balanced, making it harder for the other person to push back. After all, who wants to argue with a solution that supposedly helps both sides? But here's the catch. When someone insists on a win too early before your needs are fully understood, or before real options have been explored, it can be a way to move you toward their win, not yours. Imagine you're negotiating a contract and the other party says, "Look, this is a win-win. You get the exposure, we save on budget." On the surface, it sounds like balance. But when you look closely, you realize you're giving time and effort, and they're giving visibility. If you question it, they say, "I thought we were aiming for a win-win here." That's the trap. It subtly shames dissent. It makes disagreement feel like selfishness. This works because people generally want to be seen as reasonable, collaborative, and fair. When win-win is dangled in front of them, they may suppress legitimate concerns to avoid seeming difficult. It can shortcut healthy tension, bypass necessary questions, and lead to lopsided outcomes dressed up in friendly language. But not all uses of win-win are deceptive. In fact, when two parties truly explore each other's interests, communicate clearly, and make space for creative solutions, a genuine win-win is powerful. It builds trust. It sustains relationships. The difference is in the timing and the intent. Real win-win emerges at the end of a thoughtful process, not the beginning. To avoid the fallacy, pause when you hear the phrase. Ask, win-win, by whose definition? What does winning actually look like for both sides? Don't let the language lull you into agreement. Push for clarity. Make sure your version of success is visible, not just assumed. And if someone uses win-win as a shield to avoid negotiation, gently call it out. I want this to work for both of us, but let's define what that really means first. Because in negotiation, fairness doesn't come from catchy phrases. It comes from mutual understanding, open dialogue, and deals that are earned, not just framed. ZOPA, the zone of possible agreement. In every negotiation, there's a hidden space not always obvious, not always easy to find, but quietly sitting between your ideal outcome and theirs. This space is called the ZOPA, the zone of possible agreement. It's where your interests and theirs overlap. And once you identify it, the conversation shifts from, "Can we make a deal?" to, "How do we shape the best one?" The ZOPA is a range, not a point. It lies between your lowest acceptable outcome and their highest willingness to offer. If your minimum selling price is $0.50, and the buyer's maximum budget is $65, you have a ZOPA. The zone stretches across sifting zero of possibility. Within that range, creativity, flexibility, and relationship building can thrive. Outside of it, there's only friction and eventually a polite no. What makes ZOPA powerful is that it creates focus. Without it, negotiations can drift endlessly too high, too low, circling assumptions. But once the zone is clear, both parties know they're at least speaking the same language. It becomes less about winning and more about optimizing. Each side begins shaping terms, not just price, but timeline, scope, structure, all within a range that already makes sense. Let's say you're offering consulting services. Your floor is 4.5 lakhs for the project. The client initially mentions a 2 lakh ceiling. That gives you a ZOPA. Now, instead of worrying whether the deal is even possible, you shift to what can be included. More deliverables? Faster turnaround? Additional strategy sessions? You're negotiating details, not viability. But Zopa only works when both parties are honest with themselves and each other. If one side withholds their limits or inflates expectations, the zone gets distorted. You might spend hours negotiating within a range that doesn't actually exist. That's why discovery is so important. Early questions like, what range are you comfortable with? Or, what would make this worth it on your end? Help reveal whether a Zopa even exists. And sometimes it doesn't. There may simply be no overlap. Their maximum is below your minimum, and that's okay. It's better to know that early than to keep pushing a deal that's structurally impossible. Clarity saves energy and preserves relationships. To work effectively within the Zopa, define your boundaries clearly before the conversation begins. Know your flaw, know your ideal, then listen closely for theirs. You don't need perfect alignment, just enough space to meet in the middle with intention. Because in negotiation, success doesn't always live at the extremes. It lives in the quiet space where needs overlap and possibility begins. Power of open-ended questions. There's a simple shift in language that can completely change a negotiation. Instead of asking, "Is this what you need?" you ask, "What does success look like for you?" That second question opens a door not just to information, but to trust. This is the quiet strength of open-ended questions. They get people to talk more, reveal more, and connect more deeply with what they actually want. Closed-ended questions lead to short answers. Yes, no, maybe. They stop movement. But open-ended questions invite reflection. They make people explain, elaborate, and think out loud. And when people talk, they often uncover things they didn't even realize were driving them. For a negotiator, that's gold. The more someone shares, the easier it is to shape your offer around their real motivations, not just their surface-level demands. Imagine you're sitting with a potential client. Instead of asking, "Do you need faster turnaround?" you ask, "What kind of timeline would make this feel smooth for you?" Now they're thinking. They might say, "We're under pressure from another team we're really aiming for next Friday." That's more than a timeline. That's a window into their urgency, their stress, their internal politics. All from one well-placed question. Or let's say a vendor gives you a firm price. Instead of replying with, "Can you go lower?" you say, "What kind of flexibility do you have on pricing if we expanded the scope?" That question invites creativity. It shows you're willing to explore, and that tone, collaborative, not confrontational, often gets you more than a direct ask would. Why does this work so well? Because people like to feel understood, and open-ended questions signal that you're not here to trap them, you're here to explore with them. That lowers defensiveness. It turns a rigid exchange into a flexible conversation. It creates movement, where otherwise things might lock up. But it takes practice. Open-ended questions aren't always natural in a high-pressure moment. We're conditioned to ask fast, targeted things. Is this okay? Can you do that? So slow down. Ask what and how questions. Listen longer than you speak, and don't just ask to get information. Ask to build connection. Because in negotiation, the more someone talks, the more you learn, and the more they feel heard, the more likely they are to meet you where it matters. Managing anger in negotiation. Negotiation doesn't always stay polite. Sometimes frustration bubbles up, voices rise, eyes narrow, and the conversation takes on a sharp edge. Anger can enter the room quietly or all at once. And when it does, most people either shut down or fight back. But there's a third option to stay grounded. Recognize the emotional shift and diffuse it without losing control. That's the art of managing anger In negotiation, anger is rarely about just one thing. It often comes from feeling unheard, cornered, disrespected, or overwhelmed. In a negotiation, it may surface when someone feels like they're losing power, being manipulated, or not getting the outcome they expected. The challenge is, once anger appears, logic tends to disappear. Emotions take over, and the risk of escalation rises sharply. Let's say someone suddenly slams the table and says, "This is ridiculous, I'm wasting my time." Your instinct might be to defend yourself or snap back, but instead, you pause, you breathe, and you say something like, "It seems like this has been frustrating for you." That's not weakness, it's control. You're naming the emotion without feeding it. You're showing that you're still here, still calm, and still willing to engage. Or maybe the anger is quieter, a cold silence, a passive-aggressive tone. You notice it, and instead of ignoring it, you gently ask, "Is there something we need to address before moving forward?" That simple question can open the pressure valve. You're not accusing, you're inviting. This approach works because anger often wants an audience. It thrives on reaction. But when you stay calm, you remove its fuel. You also shift the tone from reactive to responsive. You're modeling the emotional energy you want the room to return to. And over time, most people do. Emotions are contagious, and so is composure. To manage anger well, you need emotional self-awareness. Notice your own triggers. Recognize when your breath tightens or your voice wants to rise. Give yourself a moment before responding. Silence is powerful, especially when it's calm. And if you make a mistake and match the heat, it's okay to reset. A simple, "Let's take a step back and restart," can be enough. You're not responsible for someone else's emotion, but you are responsible for your response. And often, your steady presence is what brings the temperature back down. Because in negotiation, anger doesn't have to be a threat. Sometimes, it's just a signal that something needs to be heard, acknowledged, and gently steered back to center. Knowing when to walk away. There's a quiet strength in being able to say, "No, thank you," and mean it. Not with anger, not as a threat, but as a clear recognition that the deal in front of you simply isn't right. This is one of the most underappreciated powers in negotiation. Knowing when to walk away, and not just knowing it, but being ready to do it. The willingness to walk away changes how you show up. It makes you less reactive, more centered, and far harder to manipulate. You're no longer negotiating out of fear, scarcity, or desperation. You're negotiating from clarity, from a place of, "I'd like this to work, but not at any cost." That kind of calm confidence sends a strong signal. You value yourself, your time, and your standards. Let's say you're offered a contract that looks good on the surface, but the fine print reveals risk. You ask for clarification, and the other side brushes it off. Instead of pushing forward to salvage the deal, you pause and say, "I appreciate the opportunity, but this no longer feels aligned." That moment, when you choose self-respect over compromise, is where true leverage lives. Or maybe you're in salary negotiations. The numbers stall. You've presented your case, stayed professional, and listened carefully, but the offer just doesn't meet your floor. Instead of stretching yourself thinner, you say, "I think this role has potential, but the fit isn't there for me at this level." Again, you haven't burned the bridge. You've just refused to cross it on shaky footing. Why does walking away work? Because it resets power. It removes the emotional hook that others can pull on. It says, "I have options, I'm not trapped here." And that shift can often bring the other party back with new flexibility. But even if it doesn't, you've protected something more important: your integrity, your time, and your energy. But walking away isn't about being cold or inflexible. It's about having boundaries. To do it well, you have to know your minimums in advance. What's your floor? What are your non-negotiables? What signals would tell you this deal isn't worth the cost? These aren't things you want to figure out in the heat of the moment. They're things you prepare beforehand, so when the time comes, you don't hesitate. Because sometimes, the most powerful move in negotiation isn't what you offer or what you ask for. It's what you're willing to leave behind. Closing without pressure. In negotiation, there's a moment when everything has been said, the terms are clear, the concerns addressed, the value laid out, and yet, the final yes still lingers just out of reach. This is where many people get nervous. They push harder, repeat themselves, or add urgency. But the most effective closers don't chase the yes, they invite it. Closing without pressure is an art not of persuasion, but of timing. It's about knowing when to stop talking, when to let silence work for you, when to give space so the other person can feel like the decision is theirs, not yours. Because the truth is, people commit more fully to choices they make freely, not the ones they're talked into. Imagine you've just outlined a proposal to a client. You've answered every question. There's a pause. Instead of filling the silence with more information, you simply say, "Take your time. Let me know what feels right." That line might sound small, but it carries weight. It shows confidence. It communicates trust. And most importantly, it gives the other person space to say yes on their own terms. Or consider a situation where someone is hesitating. You could press or you could ask, what would need to be true for this to feel like a good fit? That question shifts the energy. It's not demanding, it's exploring. And often, it uncovers the one small thing that's standing in the way of a yes. This approach works because it respects autonomy. No one likes to feel cornered. Even when a deal is great, too much pressure can make it feel like a trap. But when you give space, the decision feels collaborative. The other party doesn't feel sold to, they feel supported. That's what makes the agreement more durable, more genuine. Closing gently also requires comfort with uncertainty. You have to trust that if the offer is right, and if you've shown up with integrity, the right outcome will follow. It may not be immediate, but pressure rarely speeds up commitment. It just adds tension, and tension often leads to regret. To close without pressure, focus on clarity, not control. Make your offer easy to understand. Ask one clean question and let it hang. Does this feel like a direction you'd be open to? Then pause. Let the silence speak. That space, you create that breath between their decision and your words. That's where trust takes shape. Because in negotiation, a great close doesn't force a yes. It creates a moment where yes feels safe. Renegotiating after agreement. Sometimes, after the handshake, something shifts. A new detail emerges. Circumstances change. Or maybe you agreed to something too quickly, and now it doesn't sit right. The deal is done, but it no longer feels right. That's when you face the delicate challenge of renegotiation. And while it's tempting to leave things alone to avoid awkwardness, the truth is, you can revisit a deal. You just have to do it with care. Renegotiation doesn't mean breaking trust. When handled respectfully, it can actually deepen it. Because in real life, change happens. Timelines stretch, resources shrink, information evolves. The key is not pretending everything's fine, it's being honest early and framing the conversation not as a reversal, but as a refinement. Let's say you committed to a delivery date, but halfway through the project, you discover that the scope has quietly expanded. Instead of ignoring the tension or pushing through, you pause and say, "I've been reviewing the new expectations, and I think we may need to revisit our timeline to keep quality intact." That isn't backing out. That's protecting the agreement for both sides. Or maybe you agreed to a price that, after running the numbers, no longer makes sense. You reach out with humility. "I want to be transparent after revisiting the costs. I realize this structure may not be sustainable on my end. I'd like to explore if there's a way to rebalance things." You're not demanding, you're inviting, and that tone makes all the difference. Why does this work? Because people respect honesty, especially when it's paired with responsibility. You're not blaming anyone. You're not making it emotional. You're offering new information, paired with a path forward. And often, when you show up with clarity and sincerity, others meet you there. But timing matters. The longer you wait, the harder it becomes. If something feels off, bring it up quickly. And preparation matters too. Know what you need, why it changed, and what you're proposing instead. Don't just say, "This doesn't work." Say, "Here's how it could still work for both of us." Also, be open to compromise. Renegotiation isn't always about getting exactly what you want. It's about realigning, not rewriting. You're aiming for an outcome that preserves trust, honors the relationship, and still respects your evolving needs. Because in negotiation, the first agreement isn't always the final one. And when change happens, as it often does, the real skill is knowing how to return to the table with grace. The quiet confidence of master negotiators. When you picture a master negotiator, what comes to mind? Someone loud, aggressive, maybe dominating the room with fast words and firm handshakes. In truth, the best negotiators rarely raise their voice. They don't rush. They don't overpower. Their strength isn't in volume or tactics. It's in presence. A calm, steady, quiet confidence that fills the space without taking it over. Mastery in negotiation isn't about winning arguments. It's about understanding people, reading between the lines, knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. The most skilled negotiators don't need to prove themselves. They don't chase agreement. They invite it gently, clearly, with just enough space for the other side to step forward on their own. You've seen it in small gestures, the way they pause before responding, the way they ask short but powerful questions. You've heard it in their tone, measured, warm, never rushed. And you've felt it in how they treat others with respect. Even when the stakes are high, they carry a mindset that says, "I know my value, I respect yours. Let's find something that honors both." This mindset doesn't come from technique alone. It comes from trust, not just in the process, but in oneself. A master negotiator is rooted. They've done the inner work. They know their flaw, their goals, and their reasons. That inner clarity creates outer ease. It's why they don't panic when the offer's not perfect, or when someone challenges them. They don't collapse, they breathe. And that stillness is contagious. It calms the room. It lowers defenses. People feel safer negotiating with someone who isn't chasing, pushing, or posturing. That's where trust begins. And trust is what makes good deals possible. So as you reflect on all these techniques, the tools, the strategies, the psychology, remember this: none of them matter without the presence behind them. Your mindset, your breath, your calm attention, these are your greatest assets. The mechanics are important, yes. But mastery lives in how you show up again and again with clarity, composure, and care. You don't need to outsmart the room. You just need to stay in yours. Because in the end, the true sign of a great negotiator isn't how loudly they speak, it's how softly they lead.